What's up, guys? Welcome to this week's episode of Essie and Scrappy. And based upon the banter that Scrappy and I just had before we hit the record button, I think this episode might elicit a lot of reaction from not only Scrappy, but from everyone. And
we're in for a belter.
And the one thing that I want to make sure that I say is this, and that is putting people in order in terms of a big board is super hard. Right?
It is. It really is.
So we can come down to kind of all sorts of different kind of what weighs where, what are we weighing things on? I will say Fargo in this big board plays a bigger role than anything previous. Okay. It just does.
Okay, I appreciate
it's the most recent national event.
You're coming out with the fact that in your big board there is a recency bias, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I appreciate that you're at least saying what happened most recently does matter most.
It does.
And I agree with you on that. I don't disagree. I think body of work is super important as a whole, but I do agree that,
Yeah, I think don't get me wrong, like winning state titles and NHSCAs and being an All-American, that was really reflected in the last ranking. And this one got shaken up a little bit because of national duels and Fargo, and even to a much lesser degree, like Deep South. Now, One of the things that I'll also say is this, and that is that when we're having this discussion, we're going to actually count down the top 5 freshmen, because I will tell you, man, with freshmen, except for maybe number 1, it's a little bit like throwing some darts, right?
It is dart throwing. Like, I even did my best to try to find some other ones in Georgia. And here's the other thing. There are guys that we are going to miss.
Right.
It is what it is. Like, That's just the way that the game works. So ahead of time, if we missed you, put a chip on your shoulder and get to work. What can I tell you?
That's right. They missed Lucas Da Silva many, many times.
I know. The first one that didn't miss me, though, I'm sitting across the screen from.
Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes a blind squirrel finds a nut, and sometimes you don't. And that's just one of those things.
And sometimes you find me. It is what it is.
Well, you're the nut. It was appropriate.
Fair enough.
And then what we're going to do is we're going to count down the top 10 for the other classes. And Lucas, he can see all of them. And for the seniors, it's the top 90. And for, I think it's the juniors, it's the top 70.
Which I will say, extensive work from you went into this.
It took a while. And I know people like to see things happen pretty quickly, but I like to get a lot of information, pull it together, understand what, all the nuances. And I will say, I mean, if you go to SC Wrestle Plus and look at number 85 and so on and so forth, it's pretty difficult, especially Lucas and I might disagree about the order of the top 10, but we might not disagree about who should be in the top 10 necessarily. We might, maybe down at 8, 9, and 10. But
for the most part.
Right. But I will tell you, when we get down to the 70, 71, 72, 73, it's a much more difficult thing because it's a lot of comparing of apples and oranges. So all that to say, this is going to be a fun discussion. That's our discussion for today. We are going to talk a little bit about something else that's going to be a lot of fun to talk about, and that is Lucas's hand-scribbled conference realignment.
College wrestling, ladies and gentlemen. I have fixed it. And it is completed. Fixed in about an hour, drunk off coffee and soon Hari. That was about it. I was drinking and I fixed it. Ladies and gentlemen, since conference realignment in the college athletics universe is the biggest conversation, rest in peace to the Pac-12, now the Pac-6.
Pac-4.
At this point. So I said it to Jason, since Piper Fowler and Josh Boskin, we had to push it back. I am going to be interviewing them. because that needs to happen. And we just schedules, they're both busy, as am I. I'm moving into college tomorrow. For those that don't know, this is Tuesday, August 15th. We're filming this. I said I think it'd be fun, since I basically make fake brackets and charts anyways. I thought it'd be fun to do that. So we'll talk about that at the end.
All right. And then the thing we're going to start with before we jump to the big boards is a tip of the cap to Maddie Singleton, who this morning took a world bronze medal at U20s. Tomorrow morning, fellow Georgian Amani Jones kicks off her action in Amman, Jordan. And then I think in a few days, we get to see Sawyer Bartelt wrestle Greco for U20. So congratulations to them. So where should we start? We should start with the freshmen, right? And build up.
Let's start with the freshmen and work up. Yeah.
All right. And the freshmen are the single, in my opinion, most difficult group. So let's pop up the top 5. See, the top 5 are, starting with number 5, Ronan On of North Cobb, Georgia. 4, Mason Bazil, Tampa Jesuit. 3, James Sievers, Social Circle, Georgia. Landon Hawley comes in number 2 from East Lake, Florida. And number 1, Yandro Soto from Lake Highland Prep, Florida. The only one of the group to make the Fargo podium, except further down the list at number 7, Mason Bazil's teammate, KJ Vasquez, also made the podium in Greco for Team Florida. And, that played a role and trying to figure out where to put Vasquez and everything else. But I think Yandro Soto being number 1 was a pretty easy one to determine.
I will be entirely honest, ladies and gentlemen, when I opened up the freshman big board and I saw Yandro Soto number 1, I looked at Jason and said, oh my God, he's only a freshman. Like that kid moves and wrestles like a ring general and understands controlling a match on the mat. I didn't think he was a freshman. I thought he was at least a junior, I'll be honest. But because of tournaments like Elite 8, where I've seen him go to battle, right. Speaking of Elite 8, just about a month away. We'll talk about that in later episodes, but a shout out. I'll be back in Atlanta. But beyond that, I think this is one of the lists where, Jason, I don't have too much disagreement with you.
Well, I will say, one of the things that makes it hard and easy, okay? Number one of the things that makes it easier is that several of the freshmen from Florida, and because they're in Florida and in some of the other states,
they've already wrestled varsity.
They've already had an opportunity. Landon Hawley was a state placer. Further down, Mason Odell was, I think, a state champion. All of these have,
I did know Mason Odell. Okay, I saw that name and I was like, is that who I think it is? Okay.
Well, and further down, and from Alabama, we've got Austin Campbell. Again, Alabama gives you an opportunity to wrestle before that. The Georgia kids, it's a little bit more difficult. I think it's the same thing with North Carolina.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more of a challenge. And I will say the other part is that, we've got Jackson Lane, some McCallie kids in this group as well. And one of the things that's really interesting about the top 25 in the class of 2027 is that we have some mixture where we normally have a lot of 6-pounders, but we don't have a lot of 6-pounders necessarily in this group. Soto's not a 6-pounder. Holly's not a 6-pounder. Sievers isn't. Bazil isn't. Ronan On. Our top
On's
5 are not
70. On's a middleweight, a true blue middleweight.
Right. So we're, and Landon Hawley, for those people who don't know, is the number 1 or one of the top ranked quarterbacks in the entire country.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So, and he's quite a good wrestler as well. I hope he sticks with wrestling and does both. Like a person we're going to talk about a little bit later, in Jacob Levy, and
we know what's going to happen there. But beyond that, the only thing I'd maybe say about this list is Ronan On. I love him, and maybe it is knowing him so long. Seaver, same thing. I feel like maybe he has an argument to be maybe a spot or 2 higher, but he was injured and didn't wrestle as much as past year. So,
well,
either way,
and honestly, that plays a role, right? I mean, On has been injured. Sievers, to his credit, wrestled 120 in freestyle then I don't think there was a spot at 20 or 26. So he had to go 32 in Fargo after wrestling 20
and battled.
Just a few days.
He had a rough go, but he battled. I have to give him credit for that.
Right. Absolutely. So
completely agree though.
All right. So let's jump to 2026 and let's go from number 10 to number 6, and then we'll go number 1 through 5 kind of as we get to that.
Yeah.
Number 10, Gabe Swan, Central Carroll. Number 9, Mason Jacob of Dobbins Bennett, Tennessee. Dallas Russell, Jefferson. Antonio Mills, Mill Creek, Georgia. And number 6, Fargo All-American, now I think a 3-time Fargo All-American, Caleb Rodriguez of First Baptist Naples from Florida. So just a general feeling about 6 through 10, and anybody below that maybe you think pushes into that top 10?
So, I mean, there obviously, we know the bag Bilardo and Cordero have. Bentley Sly is a stud. Another guy I'm super high on that's a little bit lower, and I won't say too much about him right now because obviously but Jake Reum for me, I'm super high on. He's a little bit lower. I feel like we'll see him creep higher up, but when it comes to 10 through 6, I think it makes the most sense the way you have it. I mean, obviously, like everybody knows, I'm a Georgia guy. I have been friends with Dallas Russell and his family for years. The Swans I've known for years. The Mills I've known for years. But, if I am honest looking at it, I think you got 10 through 6 spot on.
All right. So let's jump to number 5. John Stewart out of Scottsboro, Alabama, who made the podium in 16U in Fargo, wrestles for Minions.
Yep. Super tough.
Pretty good tough. Number 5, right?
Agreed.
Number 4, Zeno Moore, Lake Highland Prep. Also a Fargo All-American. Number 3, Jojo Uhorchuk, Signal Mountain. Boy, he looked fantastic in Fargo. In fact, he would be number 1 if not for the 2 guys sitting in front of him. Really, honestly, Ryder Wilder, who just grew by leaps and bounds this year, comes in at number 2 from Camden County, Georgia. And I don't know how you can. I mean, Ryder's he's just unbelievably good, but I don't know how you compete with Michael Mocco, who is a number 1. He was outstanding wrestler in 16U for freestyle. Greco, he's a 2-time champ in Fargo, was a state champion just like Ryder Wilder was this past year. So that's your top 5. What do you think?
I don't even have a single change. The only thing I might say is you could maybe make an argument for Stewart over Moore. But I think that, again, I think the top 10 at 2026, I don't say this very often, but Jason, I have no complaints. This is it. You nailed it. Like for what you had to look at, I don't necessarily disagree with anything you said there.
All right. Is there anybody down lower that like a Hunter Crossan, who I like Hunter, but we haven't seen him wrestle much. Obviously,
like if I really start getting super nitpicky, I'm gonna continue to say that Hunter Prosen is Georgia's best kept secret. I think he is super talented, just like you said. He doesn't give me an argument when he doesn't wrestle that much. So I understand him being there. To get off of Georgia, landing Quiroga, who I still can never say his name correctly, but I love watching him wrestle. I would not be surprised to see him continue to take leaps and bounds up that. Josiah Boyden, for me, I mean, look, I understand that folk style may not be his style, but he is a monster in Greco.
He is.
Didn't have the Fargo he wanted. Talked to him about that when I went down. Shout out Backyard Bullies. But, I mean, and then, so when I look at the Georgia guys that were left off the list, Forrest, Griffin Harper, Brandon Lockett in North Murray, Jackson Moffitt at East Forsyth, who I've got to work with rather recently, a guy that I've made clear I'm super high on in the state of Georgia, Patrick Smythe. There's obviously guys I could try to argue to be at the bottom end of that list or maybe a couple spots higher. But especially when you look into that top 20, top 25, I think you did a fairly good job.
All right. So let's move to the class of 2025. And now we get into
Now,
some
this
discussion.
is where you and me are going to fight. This is where we're going to fight. I'm going to start this off because I want to get through this. 10 through 6. Oh, I just noticed something else. Oh, okay. Well,
Okay.
Number 10, Sebastian DeGennaro of Jensen Beach. Number 9, EJ Solis, South Dade. 8, Maximus Norman out of Baylor, Tennessee. Number 7, Blue Stifler out of Mill Creek High School. And number 6, Dominic Bambinelli, his teammate at Mill Creek High School. Now, I'm going to make a Dominic Bambinelli and Blue Stifler as a coin flip entirely because Blue Stifler has went on a amazing run these past months.
I agree
and had
with
a
you.
fantastic Fargo, right?
I agree with
so
you.
I don't have an
Yes.
issue with that. Sebastian DeGennaro should be higher.
So actually, I think you could actually even argue that he could be lower because he didn't have a great Fargo.
He did have a great Fargo, but if you look at the matches he wrestled in the competition he wrestled, this isn't like he had cupcakes. He didn't. I'm not the one to normally argue for draws here, but if we're going to say about somebody's draw in brackets from Fargo, I can make the case for DeGennaro. Like, come on,
I agree
now,
with that.
son. Now,
so you're putting him you're putting him up in front of Solis, in front of Norman,
Yes.
in front of Stifler,
possibly,
in front of Bambinelli.
possibly. I think he's that good.
Okay.
Like,
all right.
Because the other thing is, I'm an accolades guy, but at the end of the day, I'm an eye test guy. And so Sebastian DeGennaro, and to not say none of these guys also fit this model I'm about to say. But for me, Sebastian DeGennaro ticks all the boxes for a superstar. He ticks every box.
I agree.
So I would have had him a few spots higher. So that's the big one. Number 5, at BUFORD, Drew Gorman. I think that's fair. Didn't have the Fargo he wanted.
Still made the blood round.
No, had a good showing, but not what he would have wanted. I spoke to him because I'm friends with him. You and I obviously spoke to his father throughout Fargo.
Right.
That makes sense. Number 4, the man that made me look like $1 million out of Colquitt County, Logan Paradice. Love that kid to death, and he wrestled like a monster.
He did.
And a banged up kid that got through freestyle, made the podium, and dropped a real tough one, then took a real, like, you're wrestling Peterson Manville in the consolation semis. I mean, you give it all you got to the monster. Right. You know what I'm saying? So,
yes.
Now, could I make an argument for him being another spot higher? Yes, but I'm not complaining. Number 3, Cooper Hilton out of Boom Ranch, Tennessee, I guess we'll say for now.
Yes.
Kid's a killer, right? And a monster, and arguably my greatest picture I've ever taken in the history of my photography career. So shout out Cooper, thank you.
Which isn't long, so don't.
No, it's not.
Make sure you keep that in context.
Where we're gonna fight. This is where we're gonna fight.
Okay.
I need, ladies and gentlemen, number 2 at Carrollton High School, Jacob Levy. Number 1 out of Lake Highland Prep, Florida, CJ Torres. CJ Torres is a monster. However, I don't comprehend how a guy could walk in as a head and 16U. Do you have a Fargo stop sign you at home that just said that?
I
no?
do not.
Shut up. So shut up. I don't either. Jacob Levy walks into and I understand it was heavyweight, but let's not act like that they were bummed. This was a good crop of heavyweights. This wasn't good. I'm saying in terms of on the average heavyweight bracket, these guys that we're seeing, I promise you will be some of the same guys winning placements at NCAAs in years to come. You could book me on it. He wins it in good fashion, wrestled fantastically.
Agreed.
And he sits behind CJ Torres, who, while an All-American, I'm not taking away from CJ Torres here. I don't understand it.
So I think that you could actually probably see it throughout probably some of what we're talking about here. And whether it's fair or not fair.
Heavyweights get shellacked because you don't like big people.
Well, hang on.
You're a body shamer.
There are 2 things that actually come into play, and it's not fair, okay? But if you're a 94 pounder, right? You're a 106 pounder. You're a 100 pounder. You're a 285, rightfully or wrong. I think people look at 38, 45, 50, 57, whether we're using new weights or old weights or whatever. We have a tendency to look at those brackets, and I don't think that we would disagree that those brackets are far deeper.
That's not my argument here. I get that. I don't disagree with that. You remember, I am of the firm belief that the best wrestlers, when it comes to actually technical, like the best on the whole, typically come from the range of about 132 to about 160, right? I get that. This is my argument. How big is CJ Torres? What does he wrestle?
152.
152. By the way, this sounds like I'm dogging CJ Torres, by the way, and I'm not.
I'm not dogging Jacob because
CJ Torres is a monster. He's 150 pounds. Jacob Levy walks around at about 240, 250. Jacob Levy can almost do everything Claudio Torres can do on a mat, but 100 pounds heavier. That's my argument. This isn't some big plodding heavyweight that snaps everybody down.
100%.
He's a freak of nature who I have in wrestling shoes watched him run a 40-yard dash at 4'8", 4'9", whatever it was. Like, he's a freak of nature. So I made the comparison to him being Tamari Fox, but just that cares about wrestling. This is my point. He is a freak athlete that just really loves wrestling and is really, really good at it.
No, I agree. The other thing I was going to bring up was that I have a tendency, and again, whether it's right or it's wrong, I have a tendency to look at the junior brackets and give them more weight than I do the 16U brackets. I just do. You look back down at 6 and 7 and Bambinelli and Stifler. And Stifler wins the tournament in 16U. Yeah. Bambinelli didn't make the podium in a really tough weight in juniors. And I'm still got Bambinelli one slot ahead of him. Max Norman took second in one style, third in another style at 16U. So, but you watch, and that's why when we go back to our conversation way before Fargo, that step from 16U to juniors is a big step. And that's one of the reasons why I'm looking at Logan Paradice. I'm looking at Cooper Hilton, and man, that's impressive.
I agree with you there, but this is where you and me differ. These aren't guys taking 6th and 7th at 16U.
No, I agree.
These are champions. And
that is correct.
I'll even take a step further. I love accolades. I'm an eye test guy. The ones who are wrestling savants like you and I that watch so much wrestling, we can tell when someone's a faker. There are certain 16U champions that we saw at Fargo that we both could look at each other and say, okay.
We'll have to see where they go.
Jacob Levy's not one of them.
I
Blue
agree with
Stifler's
you.
not one of them.
I agree.
And let me say this. Like, there are other, like CJ Torres, from when he was in 16U, we didn't have to think about it. We could see it, that he was a superstar in the making, which he is. I'm not saying he should be 20th. I'm saying he should be number 2.
Yeah. One thing that I will say, one thing I will say about the class of 2025 is it is an impressive class in the South, across the South.
Want me to throw something nutty at you? Number 32 on this list is Cade Parent.
Yeah.
That's number 32.
And he wasn't ranked last time.
No, but it's so deep. You go down like 43, for my Georgia people, 43 is Brian Papkin. Ollie Webb is 38. Jaden Morris is 36.
Yes.
A guy I'm super high on. I'm super high on, Vines out of Thompson. He's 56. Now, you guys can see the rest of it on SC Wrestle Plus. But that's how deep. We haven't even mentioned guys like Nate Askew, Chris Mann, Cy Fowler, Kristen Fretwell, who you can see on the list where they are. But that's how deep this group is.
Well, and that's why I think that you also have to keep this in mind, right? The number 20 guy in the class of 2026 and the number 20 in the class of 2025, they're not they're not necessarily
No.
equal 20s. Okay.
No, I agree.
You have to keep, just because it's a relative comparison to the other individuals in your class. And this class is special. It's a special class. All right.
I couldn't agree more.
Let's jump to 2024. But before I do that, you're going to hear us talk about all the guys' big boards this week. Well, you know what we're going to do? Next week, we're going to talk about all the women.
Yes, sir.
All right. So just so that if anybody's watching it and they're wondering, that is what we're doing. So the men are this week, women are next week. Let's go jump to the seniors. And why don't you give me the, I'm sorry? What'd you say? Sexism?
Yeah.
I should have put the women first. Actually, I did the men's first. So that's why we're doing it.
How dare you?
I'm not actually done with the women yet. All right. So you do the countdown from 10 to 6.
10 to 6. At Osceola High School at number 10 is Anderson Heath. Number 9, Kendrick Hodge. Number 8 at a Commerce High School in Georgia, Hope Poe Hogan. Number 7 at a Dade County, Landon Williams. And number 6, Latrell Schafer.
Yep. So this was a tough one for me.
And seeing above him, I could see why it would be very difficult.
Right. And we'll get to the ones above in a minute.
We'll get there when we get there.
And you know, there were wrestlers that I think you can make an argument for. I mean, Logan Fowler, Tyler Secoy, you know, all these individuals who are a little bit further down below Anderson Heap. You know, Secoy freaking makes the Greco finals, you know, so I mean, that's something to be said. Fowler had a great tournament. You know, this is, for me, right around Heap or Hodge down to into the 20s. I think they're all pretty close to one another.
Well, like, I think it's really hard. You even look at number where Seth Larson is. Like,
right.
That in of itself is kind of nutty to think about, because he is arguably one of Georgia's best in this class. I'll even go at beep. You got Jarvis Little out of Summit, Tennessee. Like, the class is super deep from like 4 to 28. Yeah, just it's really difficult. So
you know, and the other part is that some people made a huge impact. So Cole Carter from Jasper, Alabama jumped a lot because he made the blood round in Fargo. You know,
one of the biggest jumps I've seen on this list.
Right. Whereas there were a few others that moved maybe a little bit down, not because they didn't have necessarily a good Fargo, but some of them didn't wrestle. They haven't wrestled. You know, Creed Thomas out of Jefferson hasn't wrestled a whole lot. We haven't seen him a whole lot. So the thing that it was really hard for me between Landon Williams and Hope Poe. Williams beat him in the state finals. That still plays a role for me of having him above him. I'll tell you what, Hoke looked unbelievably good in Fargo.
No, he looked incredible. So
I mean, I could see him being higher than what he is. Latrell, I thought Latrell wrestled really well in the duels, and I was looking forward to watching him in Fargo, and then we didn't get to see him. So anyway,
I think with Williams and Poe, I think the thing is in the way Landon won that match. I think until otherwise stated, you have to give him the nod.
It's pretty hard not to, right?
It's kind of like when that match goes that kind of way, I don't care if you win a world title. There's an old saying in Brooklyn, it's you better go get that boy. It doesn't matter what you do. You better go get that boy. No, I'm being serious. Like, it wasn't a 1-point match. That it's not like Tyler Secoy, where Tyler Secoy is a long nose hair second away from being a Fargo champion. That wasn't what happened in Macon.
That's true. All right.
Number 5.
Yeah.
Out of Mallard Creek, North Carolina, Cameron Stinson, who wrestled unbelievably well this weekend, or 2 weekends ago at Fargo, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Just very much deserves his flowers and deserves that number 5 spot. I might even argue for another spot higher.
Above number 4, Jake Craps.
Craps out of Cass. And my only thing is we haven't seen him.
I agree. I agree. Figuring out where Jake was going to fall on this list was really hard for me because we haven't seen him wrestle. He is on the rosters for Elite 8, though.
Yes, he is.
So that might be fun.
But media secret. We already have the Elite 8 roster, ladies and gentlemen. We already have the rosters.
Well, let's actually keep this. Let's put this in perspective. It's August 15th. It's a month away. The rosters could be completely different in 48 hours from now. So just because he's on the roster today doesn't mean that he'll actually be there.
I hear Dynasty's pulling in Lucas Da Silva Jr. at 220.
You already talked to Tim Ziola?
No, I'm messing around.
All right. Number 3, and between number 3 and number 2, I had a hard time. So number 3 is Ethan Rivera, Lake Highland Prep. Number 2, JJ Peace out of Kane Bay, South Carolina. Rivera finished ahead of him in Fargo, but man, I'll tell you what, Peace, I think it might have been one of his first freestyle tournaments, and he freaking makes top 8 in one of the toughest weights
I can't disagree with. I actually agree with this entirely, and it comes down a little bit to eye test for me. Peace just one of the biggest things for me is development. If I could see how much a guy changes from the last time I saw a Peace, which would have been last season, to now, here to here. I agree with his placement at number 2. I completely agree, actually. He's a stud and a superstar in the making.
And number 1.
He's one of those guys.
And number 1, do you agree?
It's Sawyer Bartelt. I mean, it is. It's Sawyer Bartelt. I mean, the dude is a monster among men.
He is. He is. And he's getting ready to wrestle U20s. He's still a senior in high school, getting ready to wrestle U20s in Jordan later this week. He won Fargo. I wouldn't say he just went out and ran through people, because he didn't. But you know what? He wrestled how he needed to wrestle to win the match. And that's at the end of the day, taking W's is really all that matters. And he only got to wrestle Greco because he couldn't get there for freestyle because he had a mandatory training camp for 120 or U20s in the world team.
Otherwise, we might talk about a double champion.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so that's the big boards. That was a lot of fun, man.
Yes, it was.
All right, so if you're interested, Scrappy has a lot of takes on some other parts of the lists, and you
4
to
to 5
read
bullet points on each, probably.
You can see where he disagrees with me, who should be higher, who should be lower. Further on, if you go and actually read and look at the entire list. And now let's transition to you fixing college wrestling.
Yes. So for those who don't know me, one of the things I love most is thought experiments. I love this kind of stuff
which just seems like an oxymoron for you.
I'm gonna punch you in the mouth. So not only the way I thought about this was making conferences that make sense geographically, so you won't have Little Rock against Oregon State as a conference dual meet, 1. But beyond that, how can we make national duels more efficient and doable?
Okay.
I have made 8 ratherly even conferences.
Okay.
Not only geographically, but level, where I don't necessarily think you'll have one single conference dominate the others.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and say right up front, we have a complete recognition that this is not a reality.
Yeah, no, this is entirely just
this is fun. Not a they're not going to do away with the Big Ten. They're not going to do this. They're not going to do that. This isn't us making an argument for what they should do. This is just this is more of an argument of of if you were to realign college wrestling and it was in its own bubble.
If you made me king for a day, this is what would happen.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
I
if,
say we
if
start.
Lucas was made king for a day, we're in trouble.
Yeah, I am including all programs that are in transition. So this includes Morgan State, Queens, and Tarleton State. This includes all of them because I felt like it was important to bring them into the fold now. We're going to start west to east.
Okay.
My pack is 10 teams. Oregon State, Stanford, Cal Poly, Cal State Bakersfield, Cal Baptist, Utah Valley State, Wyoming, Northern Colorado, Air Force, Arizona State. That's my pack. You have a team that is a top 4 threat every year in Arizona State, and you have teams that every couple years do bring enough to the mix, teams like Stanford, Oregon State, etc.
Okay.
Then you would move to my Big 12. This is where things start getting finicky. North Dakota State.
But it's not
South
12.
Dakota
Is it 12
State.
teams?
Nope.
It's not 12
teams.
It is 10. Okay.
Look, the Big 10 is 18 teams. I don't think we're caring about numbers
I
anymore.
know. I just didn't want to make sure. I wanted to make sure nobody was confused.
True. North Dakota State, South Dakota State. We bring Nebraska back into the Big 12.
I like that.
SIUE, Lindenwood, Missouri, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Little Rock, Tarleton State. Obviously, you make this conference super deep with Nebraska, the Oklahomas, and Missouri. But you have schools like Lindenwood, Little Rock, Tarleton, who are obviously going to be a little bit further along in the process. We're wrestling these teams week in and week out. I think is super important for their development.
I think it's actually sounds like a really good conference. I think that's a lot of fun. Now, my question in this regard, and it's the same one as out west, and it will probably be the same one moving forward, is do you have like an East and a West division or North and a South division?
I do have
of the 10 teams.
I did make optional divisions in each, and out west you have a Pacific division, Oregon State, Stanford, and the 3 California schools, and a mountain division, Wyoming, Northern Colorado, Air Force, Utah Valley State, and Arizona State.
You don't have to give that to me. I just was curious if you did that.
And then in the Big 12, I did the same thing, and I did an East and a West with Tarleton, Little Rock, Missouri, Lindenwood, and SIUE, and then the other one being the 2 Oklahomas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota State.
Ooh, that's tough.
Here's the problem. If you split it north and south, you get the Dakotas, Nebraska, SIUE, and Lindenwood. And then you get the 2 Oklahomas, Missouri, Little Rock, and Tarleton. So that one's going to be tough to separate, regardless.
I like the North-South better, but that's just me. All right.
Either way.
Moving on.
Then, the Big 10 in this universe. In the Big 10 North, Minnesota, Central Michigan, Wisconsin, Northern Iowa, Iowa State. In the Big 10 South, Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, Northern Illinois, Iowa. Basically, it has the same issue as the Big 12, where if you split it east and west, you get a Western division of Northern Illinois, Northern Iowa, Iowa State, and Minnesota.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, it becomes problematic.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the next conference. How many total conferences do we have?
8 conferences.
All right. So this is number 4?
Yep. What I call the Great Lakes Conference. And in my opinion, this is one of the most fun conferences in this whole thing.
Okay.
Michigan State, Michigan, Cleveland State, Kent State, Ohio, Buffalo, Clarion, Edinburgh, Pitt.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because the big thing for me is if we could separate some of these best teams in the country to make the conferences more even, it should be done.
It's interesting that you're doing a conference realignment, and again, just like reality, Penn State and Pitt are not in the same conference.
No, but because the problem is if you pull Penn State in, now you have a conference with Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, and Pitt, by the way, who also in their own right are great. And I tried my best to alleviate that.
Okay. All right.
Let's move south. Let's move to the south of the East Coast Conference, or the East Coast. What I call the Carolinas Conference. Citadel, Presbyterian, Gardner-Webb, Chattanooga, Campbell, Queens, NC State, UNC, Duke, Davidson, App. This one ended up having 11 teams because realistically, travel distance for the South is always going to be an issue. And to think to add them to an ACC, or there was a while where I was thinking doing a coastal conference and kind of a Smoky Mountain, it just didn't work out. So Carolina, you have 11. And in all honesty, to me, you would do App, Chattanooga, Davidson, Gardner-Webb, Presby, Citadel, and then Campbell, Queens, Duke, UNC, NC State.
Okay.
Again, pick your poison there because that's really tough to do anyways. Then you have the ACC, Virginia Tech, VMI, Virginia, George Mason, Morgan State, Bellarmine, Maryland, West Virginia, Franklin and Marshall, Penn.
Penn, not Penn State.
Nope, Penn.
Okay, so we're not sticking, even if we wanted to, we're not sticking with the traditional Ivies. Okay.
No.
No.
But they are a geographic nightmare because you'll see the others I ran into in a moment.
All right.
Then I got some fun.
Is this
here.
number 7?
Yeah, we're coming up on number 7.
Okay.
What I'm calling the East Coast Conference. And for my college football people, you would remember Penn State and Joe Paterno tried to create the East Coast Conference in the early 80s, and it would have been Penn State, Pitt, West Virginia, Boston College, kind of a mix of the Big East and the ACC. So it's kind of cool to make an East Coast Conference here. You have Cornell, Army, Drexel, Bloomsburg, Lehigh, Bucknell, Penn State, Lock Haven.
Okay.
And then finally, what I called the North Atlantic Conference, naming, whatever. Ryder, Princeton, Rutgers, Hofstra, Long Island University, Columbia, Brown, Harvard. That's your 8 conferences. And this is where things get really interesting. 8 dual. So there would be your regular dual season, which to me, I think you also should regulate conference schedules, just like the NFL does. To me, the way it would work, you would duel all your conference opponents. And then on a 2-year cycle, you would be drawn randomly against another conference. So maybe in year 1, the North Atlantic Conference gets drawn against the Big Ten. Let's say you're Harvard. Your dual schedule would be your entire conference and then one half of the Big Ten. And then the next year, you would wrestle the other half. And then you would redraw the conferences.
Okay.
You would redraw the conference matchups.
So my question is, you were talking about national duels as we were getting into this. Is the conference dual champion come out to an 8-team bracket?
It comes out to a perfect 8-team national duels bracket. Where, let me give you a scenario. Arizona State, Oklahoma State, Iowa, Michigan, Penn State, Virginia Tech, UNC, and then Rutgers. Is that a bad 8 for a national duels?
No, that would be a lot of fun.
You can make an argument for other teams, obviously.
Right.
But it will bring a relatively realistic, perfect 8. And I'll even do you one better. I went a step further. Top 3 in each conference receive auto bids to nationals and then 8 wild cards.
Ah, okay.
Because again, if I read you the top 3 in each conference, just outside looking in, PAC, Arizona State, Stanford, Oregon State. Big 12, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Missouri. Big 10, Iowa, UNI, Wisconsin. Great Lakes, Michigan, Ohio State, Pitt. Carolinas, NC State, UNC, and let's throw Chattanooga in there. ACC, Virginia Tech, Maryland, West Virginia. ECC, let's say Penn State, Cornell, Lehigh, and in the North Atlantic, let's say Rutgers, Princeton, Hofstra. Sounds like a typical NCAA bracket. And the couple schools you're missing would probably get auto bids at those weights anyways. So you get a realistic bracket both individually and in duels with a much more structured format that, in my opinion, protects each conference and protects the growth of the sport of wrestling. And, in my opinion, you would realign when you bring new teams in. You wouldn't just throw them into a conference where all of a sudden conferences get to where there's one that has 17 teams. No, I would say you realign to continue things even. That's my biggest problem with college sports.
Yeah, the problem with realignment though is that you love to build up the kind of conference like rivalries, and then if you realign, then you lose those things every
Let me ask you.
X
Let me
number of
ask you a
years.
question. Let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
How many conference rivalries are states away?
Are states away? What do you mean? Like more than
So okay,
one, or
yeah. So like okay, Michigan and Ohio State, they will almost never be realigned to not be with each other based on proximity.
that's true. That's
If
true.
you're realistic about it, so like the biggest rivalry that got separated when I did this is Iowa and Oklahoma State, which sucks because that's one of the greatest duels every year. But they're only a rivalry because of how long they competed against each other. So you could make room for protected rivalries,
Well,
like what the
and
SEC
if you're
did.
gonna have national duels,
You're
I don't care, because if you're good enough to get to that point in time, we're gonna
exactly.
get that duel anyway.
And then like the other one that jumped out to me is the backyard brawl between Pitt and West Virginia.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
those were the big ones that jumped out to me. Like for me, the two things that were most important to me were keeping the conference travel distances realistic. Where again, the idea that next year or 2 years from now in a football game, Oregon at Rutgers is a conference game. That doesn't compute in my head. Oregon, for those who don't know, is all the way over here. And Rutgers, for those who don't know, is all the way over here. And they're in the conference that the conference championship game is right here. Oh, how does that work?
Now,
That
and
doesn't make sense.
the other part that I really like about it, and this has actually been a complaint, not of the football, but of the other
In general.
sports, is the fact that what you just said, the travel, especially if you're, if you're, I mean, it maybe not be wrestling, but like you're playing softball on a Tuesday and a
Yeah.
Saturday, you're supposed to be a student athlete, like, and that makes it super difficult. So I like the region. I like the regionality.
I take pity on the student athletes at schools like Washington now.
Yeah.
They're
That's gonna be
screwed.
really
I'm
hard.
sorry. UCLA, USC, they are dead. Like that's gonna suck. It's gonna be hard. And if you've never been a student athlete, not to say you don't understand it, but there's a lot of little things that you may not even think about. That I'll give you a really stupid example. Doing laundry for me was something I had to work into my schedule. The good thing was we were only traveling to Tennessee, Carolinas, North Georgia. Imagine if Bruton Parker had a conference dual meet against Marion in Indiana on a Thursday afternoon. That means I'm missing class Thursday morning for sure. And I'm probably missing Friday morning. Because when you come back home super late, a lot of times they'll give you an excused absence.
Yeah.
For that
Well,
next
I mean,
morning.
you're probably, I mean, and especially with the way you guys traveled, you're probably missing more than that. I mean, potentially.
I wouldn't be surprised. I just feel like, of course, money. It's all about money. Yes, obviously, but I just feel like in the pursuit of money, they have screwed their own student athletes. That's what I feel like. I feel like the student athletes got thrown under the bus. And what's going to happen, I feel like what's going to happen is these mega conferences are going to go to its farthest conclusion, which is going to be basically 4 to 5 conferences of 20, 25 teams. And then I feel like those systems are going to break down. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if, let's say, 10, 15 years from now, you had a conference that was Chattanooga, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, West Georgia, and then like Florida State. Like I wouldn't be surprised if after these mega conferences, everybody's going to go back the entire opposite way, like how it was in the 40s and 50s, when if a conference had more than 3 states in it, it was like, whoa, that's a huge conference there. I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's going to go through that cycle.
We will see. We will definitely see. I'm. It's interesting to kind of just watch it all play out. Hopefully, and I tweeted this. I just fear that how it's going to impact wrestling, and I'm now being protective, and I think that's makes it super hard on wrestling. Yeah, I think
wrestling's in a rough spot because the other thing that's going to happen is now how do you explain to an AD at a school at one of these bigger conferences? How do you explain it to one, like if you really if wrestling was going to grow, do you want to know when I think the moment to strike was? In 2014, when Missouri joined the SEC. I feel like that was the moment to strike, was go there, push hard. Maybe even if you snag one other SEC school, Texas A&M, Auburn, LSU. LSU had national champions in their history. I feel like that was the moment to do it. Not this far along. I almost feel like I think the pan might have cooled off, and I hate to say that, but
oh no, the pan is totally cooled off.
I feel like
the boat has left the dock. There's no doubt.
But I mean, there is hope. Schools like Cal Baptist, Tarleton, Queens, Morgan State bringing a program. I feel like there is good things that are happening that maybe can push it in the right direction. You know, we always hear the whispers about certain schools. Like, I think I've heard for the past 3 years in a row, Georgia Tech try. And like, I've always heard it get closer and closer, and it just never happens. So maybe eventually, but I fear the worst. Like,
yeah.
I don't like the landscape for college wrestling in the near future.
All right, guys, that is our show this week. Conference realignment. You know what? I like what you did. You did a good job.
I tried.
I thought you did a good job. Big boards, like I said at the top of the show, really hard to do. I hope you guys all take it with a grain of salt. It is simply trying to kind of just, you know, we're just basically having a conversation, promoting the sport, trying to get an idea of what's going on.
I'm gonna continue to say this, Matt. If you want to be mad at that wall over there. Like, go argue with a brick wall. I'm sorry. This is we're having fun, and we're discussing the athletes and giving them the coverage that they deserve. That's all this is. We're having fun. Like,
no doubt.
And listen, all that matters to me is every time I see one of these athletes at a tournament, they run up on me, and it's, hey, you ranked me bad, but it happens with a smile, and we're BSing. That's what matters to me, is they understand where this is coming from.
All right. And next week, hopefully we'll get to hear from Piper Fowler and Coach Josh Boskin.
Open.
And we will do the women's big board. And we're not too far away from talking about some preseason events.
And speaking of the word preseason, probably not next week, ladies and gentlemen, but I think the week after that, I think it's preseason time, baby. I think it is preseason time.
That would be great. I'd love to see them.
I will announce it finally. This year, I will be doing individual rankings for the girls. I didn't last year because I wanted another year to try to understand the landscape and rework my matrix, and I think we're in a good enough position to do that. So I'm excited to announce that. I've thrown more work onto my plate.
All right, Scrappy. Until next week, I hope everybody has a great week, and we will, we'll talk to you next week.
Hey, real quick.
Yep.
I should have said this earlier. Shout out PCW, man. Platinum Championship Wrestling. They're a little pro wrestling company down in Covington, Georgia, and they've hosted me a couple of times to meet some of their guys and work out with them. Shout out to them. They some cool people down there. Shout out to Covington.
All right, and that's it. You guys have a good one. See ya.